All right, let's get the show started. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining. Welcome to InRhythm Lightning Talks. I'm your host, Parag Katkar. I'm the head of consulting practices at InRhythm. InRhythm is a modern product and technology consulting firm, and we have several exciting lightning talks coming up. Our practice leads continuously keep working on figuring out what are the latest trends in the industry, and they have curated these topics for all of you. Our lightning talks are hosted every Thursday at 5:15 p.m. Eastern Time. And this week, Paul, who is a rockstar web engineer with us, is going to give us an overview of AWS Cloud Development Kit, which is also called as AWS CDK, which is a framework to define cloud infrastructure in code and provision it through AWS CloudFormation. So without further ado, let's get it started, Paul.
Awesome. Thanks, Parag. Yes, AWS Cloud Development Kit. But how do we get there? Let's just look at the progression of tools you'll end up using when you start using AWS. Everyone starts off with the AWS console. That's the UI, going to the website, clicking through it, seeing what's there. If you're learning a new service, you'll try and create that resource and the best you can and just see what happens. It's how we all play with new services. But eventually, when we get a better feel for it, we want to do repetitive tasks. We may move on to the CLI, where we can control these resources in a more structured way, and then also a repetitive way, and then even write scripts to avoid repetition. The software development kit, this is what we're used to hearing. It's something you'll also be using within your application code to interact with these resources. And then after that came AWS SAM, which is a serverless application model. And that helps you create serverless applications, primarily with like API gateway, Lambdas, and DynamoDB. But SAM, eventually, when you have it all set up, is going to compile into CloudFormation. This is the fundamental way infrastructure is provisioned with code. When you try and define your resources with infrastructure as code, you can see on the right-hand side here, this is a YAML example. Yes, you can have parameters and you can have conditionals. This might be overwhelming if you've never seen this before, but it's not pretty. It's not we're programmers. We'll learn it. We'll make it work. But you can see up here, like a conditional here. For me, or someone looking at, if you were like looking on this the first time, or when I was first looking at this, like I see not equals, not ref, but that's not what it is. It's how you create these conditionals and references within your CloudFormation templates. But there's a way to get away from working with CloudFormation. And I'll ask you, have you ever wished you could write infrastructure as code with your favorite programming language? That's the big idea of using the Cloud Development Kit. So JSON and YAML out, programming languages in, like TypeScript, JavaScript, Python, Java, C#, and Go. So to say it another way, it's a high-level object-oriented abstraction to define your AWS resources using the power of a modern programming language. So this is what the JavaScript version looks like. You'll have a stack which represents a deployable unit of AWS resources, just like within CloudFormation, the idea of a stack. But you'll utilize constructs. This is where the object-oriented way of defining resources comes into play. Right here is an S3 bucket construct. And this can be look a little weird at first, but you're just saying that it's within the context of this stack, this argument here. You'll pass in an ID, which can be anything, but then you can pass in properties to change how your resources will be provisioned on AWS. Now, you can see there's not a lot of code here. So what's great about the CDK is that it provides these guardrails to stay on the path of well-architected principles by providing sensible defaults. So it's opinionated, but that's good because it allows us to go with those sensible defaults and not have to, like CloudFormation, provide a bunch of required properties that kind of bloat the code. So where does this live, this code? We'll put it right beside your application code. And on the left-hand side here, you can see that it's almost like its own little application. This is just a regular JavaScript project example, but within this AWS folder, there's commands to init the project, initialize the project. You can see it has its own package.json, its own node modules, its own files for itself. And one of the big benefits is that you're more likely to keep your infrastructure in sync when you're adjusting your application code because it's in the same place. You can also see that there's a file called .test. That's one extra benefit. You can write tests for defining your infrastructure since it's a regular programming language. So how do I deploy? This is where the AWS CDK CLI comes into play. So just want to show a couple of commands. I won't go too deep into this, but you can run CDK synth. And if you have more than one stack, you'll define which one to create the CloudFormation template for. But say you only have one stack, right? You would just type in CDK synth, and this is how you generate a regular CloudFormation template that you can use to deploy on AWS. But if you don't want to do that manual step, there's CDK deploy. That'll work as well. They'll create the CloudFormation template and deploy it at the same time. You can see if you modify the application and do CDK diff, it provides you great diffs to understand what your changes will actually be. So yeah, CLI is great. You can see that when you do deploy, you'll be able to see all the events of how your deployment is going. And then at the end of it, CDK destroy to take it all away if you like. So yeah, pretty sensible and straightforward as far as like how this CLI can work or does work. Some extra points. This is the way that at Amazon Web Services themselves, the developers there are setting up their infrastructure. A lot of people are opinionated that this is the way forward. That's my opinion as well. Once you break through that barrier, you learn how to define resources. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense compared to the previous tools we talked about in the beginning. So yes, you can use AWS constructs from the AWS construct library, but you can create ones that are reusable. You can build your own constructs, and there's even third-party constructs to use to create even larger abstractions around it. So you might be saying like, okay, this is great. This is for AWS. What if I'm multi-cloud or wanting to use Terraform or something? The learning wouldn't be in vain because these concepts are being applied elsewhere, like Terraform. They have the CDK for Terraform now based on how this was developed at AWS. And then also Kubernetes has their own idea following the same concepts. But yeah, guys, I hope this really enthused you to check this out. Yeah, I think if you spend a little time just working through it, it'll pay off because especially if you're using the AWS console now and you're doing repetitive tasks, this might be a good way to get into writing infrastructure as code at a higher level versus going through the process of learning CloudFormation or an equivalent tool. So happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
Amazing, thank you, Paul. I think this is a much better approach than some of the things that I've used. For example, Terraform and TerraGrunt. I remember installing all these Amazon like plugins and libraries and frameworks, and I never knew what I was writing. Like there was no autocomplete, nothing like that, just trial and error, and things just never worked the way I wanted to. Especially the Screen S3 bucket, it was just so complicated because of, I don't know, it was a really crazy Terraform ecosystem when I first tried it, maybe like 4 years ago. But I'm glad this looks a lot better, and I like that you can choose your own language instead of trying to subscribe to a new API.
For sure, yeah. I think what you mentioned too is autocomplete. This is you're using a regular programming language, so sometimes you can get by if you don't really understand like a property you need to provide or something, or you're going about it in an object-oriented way, right? So you might hit dot and then see some autocomplete that makes sense to you, avoids looking at the documentation. So yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks for that.
Question on, I guess in order to like set this up with like a continuous integration, continuous development process, is this something that we could just like run through like GitHub Actions or something similar like Travis?
So yeah, you can, I've seen it done before, set up a CI/CD pipeline. It's all about putting the constructs together. So the documentation, I believe that's where I saw it, but essentially it was super small compared to like the process I went through before, where like you have like code deploy, code build, all the constructs you need, and the pipeline in code is only like, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 lines or something. So yes, that's another use case for the CDK. And then also that code for that pipeline is going to live side by side with your application code. So that's another plus.
Thanks, Paul, for such an informative talk. And as a reminder to all of you, we do these lightning talks every Thursday at 5:15 p.m. Eastern Time. And next week, I'm really excited for next week's talk. Brian Jiang, who is a senior Android engineer with us, is going to give us an overview of Android's foldable APIs. This is to take advantage of the extra screen space offered by foldable Android phones, which most applications, they do not adapt well to this additional screen size. So I'm really looking forward to this talk. Make sure you guys mark your calendar for next week. Thank you all once again for joining. Have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you guys next week.